Podcast marketing has changed so much in 2023. So much so that I almost feel scared to make predictions for 2024. So instead, I decided that in this podcast episode, I'm going to be covering marketing advice that you should be leaving behind in 2024. These are things that I've tested myself, things that I've tested with clients. And so even though they're not quote unquote like the ultimate recipe for what not to do in 2024, I'm going to be giving you a lot of context for you to make those decisions. So sure, AI is here to help us streamline a lot about what we do in podcasting. It has removed a lot of barriers and limitations, and just about how quickly we can create content, so can others. And so I thought, well, I don't want to give you a peek into, what is AI going to be doing for us in 2024? What is social media going to be doing? Hey, algorithms change almost every month now, so it's hard to keep up. I'm going to be giving you instead things that I know that are definitely not going to be working with podcast audiences. And here's why. Podcast audiences are getting more complex. They're getting more educated on what podcasting is. I mean, you're not even able to say, listen to this. Now you can say, watch this, because YouTube is coming in strong for podcasting in 2024. So what are some things that you don't need to worry about in 2024? I'm going to be delving into the top 10 things that are going to be covering social media, content strategy, and also digital marketing in general. So let's dive right in. I'm Annick Xavier. I'm the founder of the podcast space. I'm a digital marketer for podcasters, and I help you improve your podcast one episode at a time and make it a more effective tool to grow your business. Let's dive in. Okay, so we have to start from a kind of a bigger perspective. So looking at marketing in general. So if you want marketing to be easier for your podcast in 2024, you really need to get your basics right. And for some of you, you're going to be saying, Anna, of course I got my basics right. But the reality is that sometimes we have to shift. Sometimes we have to as our business goals changed, as so much of our business has changed, because sometimes AI, it just completely removed a segment of the market that we were operating in. And so if we want to be clever in what to do in 2024, I absolutely want to make sure that you're not flying blind in the next year. So if you have no content strategy, if you have no basics right, so your listeners, you never thought about what they need, what they want from you. What is their expertise level in the topic that you're covering? If you have no goals for the show, if you have never set up content pillars, it's time to set those up. You cannot go into 2024 just experimenting. And so that is the first piece of advice. I will list all of these elements that I talked about, but sometimes we start a podcast and we're just trying to just see what happens, right? But we never took the time to look back and see what is actually working. So a lot of the overwhelm is caused by us not really knowing what people want from us. So it's important to know what is your quote-unquote unique selling point, knowing that is what makes audiences come to you for this content. And so if you are a small business owner and you're trying to determine exactly what you're going to be doing, I want you to listen to episode 13, which is content pillars and how they can help you create content consistently. But also episode 4, which is talking about the 7 goals you can set for your podcast. Revisit those episodes because, again, so much of our overwhelm is just not having any clarity on those basics, right? Maybe we shifted the podcast a little bit, and now we're realizing that when we shifted the podcast a little bit was April, and now it's December, and we've been just trying to get something out there, and it's not working for us anymore. So, moving into number 2. Number 2 is stop following the advice of gurus and content legends that have at least 5 people on their team and who go through iterations of every single episode. I talk to so many podcasters, and you may be one of them, who you follow the greats, right? Like Tim Ferriss, you may be listening to podcasts like Diary of a CEO, and they just shared on social media not that long ago that they sometimes go through 100 rounds of thumbnails, and they iterate and they change things up and they improve the editing of the show. And so if you're not someone who has a team of 5 and has a big budget to test social media thumbnails, maybe it's time that you follow someone who is just 2 steps ahead of you and 5 steps ahead of you, or just someone who is just more relatable to where you are in life. Because when you're trying to create good marketing, when you're trying to compete with people who have, 5 people on payroll to do every single step. So just know that if a newsletter looks amazing, and if you're looking at someone's clips on social media and, it has thousands and thousands of comments and likes, that probably took a whole team to make it happen. So I don't want you to compare your marketing content to those people. So that while that's aspirational in the long term, and we all want to look at something and say, I would like to be there someday, we want to make sure that we're following people and listening to podcasts of people who are relatable to us in the stage where we're at. Like, this podcast is a perfect example of me talking about how imperfect content still hits home, still helps you grow. And if I was paid by someone else to edit this podcast and my whole role was that, it would be a completely different bar, right? So again, assessing where we're at, where we have been really hard with ourselves, and looking at those wins. And so what this practically means is that when you're looking at your content, you're looking through the lens of, incremental improvements on each episode. So instead of creating the best podcast episode, super, super edited, maybe you're making sure that with each episode, you are spending time preparing so you don't have to edit as much, or making sure that you're focusing on honing in your confidence so you sound more confident in each episode. So moving into number 3, the episode angle. Not having a content calendar and not knowing where that episode is going to fall is just one of the things that I feel like a lot of people do. They have no idea why sometimes they're inviting a guest over on their show. They just know they need content, and they don't really know why people should be listening to that episode. The way that is affecting a lot of the quality of your marketing content is because you don't even have the clarity of why they should listen in the first place. So if you go into an episode going all over the place, when it's time to market the episode, it's going to be so hard. You're going to be spending so much time just trying to figure out what the angle is, right? And so there's a combination of crafting an episode that you have the idea of like, okay, if I was to tell someone about this episode, this is why it's important for them to listen. Start there and then move all the way to maybe you want to have a planner for what will the episode do for you long term in your content strategy, how it's mapped out into the goals that you have for the show, right? So far too often we go into a podcast spree of recording episodes with, whoever is available, and that's going to hurt our engagement rate. But at the same time, remember that with the goals that we're setting up for the podcast, if our goal is not really so much about the marketing and all we got to do is get in front of the decision makers so we can improve the net worth of our network, well, then probably marketing is not going to be that much of a big thing, right? But we want to make sure that we are creating cohesive content when we're marketing the podcast. So if you haven't, make sure that you're determining, at least 4 types of episodes and you're sticking to those. If you haven't, make sure that you listen to episode 13, which is talking about content pillars and how that has the power to help you create content more consistently and in a less overwhelmed state. Going into number 4, not having email marketing strategy. So having newsletters, it's super important, not only from the standpoint of reaching a different type of audience, is also because when people are on their email, they are able to access directly to the episode. The click-through rate is, better than, for instance, if you're promoting a podcast on Instagram, right? So there's the high effort and the low effort on creating email marketing that goes along your podcast. In case you're new here, over the summertime, I created an automation for the podcasts, and I talked about that on episode number 34. I'm talking about like my lessons from taking a sabbatical over the summer. And one thing that I did was to do a quote unquote a low effort email marketing strategy, which is basically an RSS automation. So when a new episode is out, a new email is sent out. So you can go for a low effort like this if that's something that works, but you cannot go into 2024 not having email marketing as part of your marketing, because so many people think about like, oh my gosh, I don't have time to write a newsletter. Well, that newsletter can be a caption from your social media post. That newsletter can be your show notes. There's so many easy ways, but you cannot continue to tell yourself that you don't have time to launch a newsletter. And it's super important, especially for those who want to monetize your podcast. Newsletters are an easier way to get sponsorship opportunities, and it can still help you bump those numbers. So even if you don't have that many downloads, newsletter subscribers can make up for that, right? So make sure that you stop telling yourself that a newsletter is not viable. Number 5, it's to continue to also say that you don't need to be on YouTube. As I said in the opening of this episode, YouTube music is not going anywhere. So you have to start making your mind about what is a strategy that you want to do. So podcast discovery is really hard on audio-only podcasts. And YouTube has 2 billion users. Podcasting is more on the millions. And of course, not everyone will listen to the same thing. And getting new listeners is really difficult. Something that I noticed in the last quarter of the year was that my podcast in December and the end of November, I have not seen a lot of growth because especially here in the US, we have the holiday season, so there's just a lot going on. But I did see growth on my YouTube account, and I'm doing the minimum. I'm not putting a lot of shorts there at all these days. And so you have to remember that, again, there's a high effort and a low effort way to do things. And just telling yourself that I don't have a video podcast, I don't have to be on YouTube, it's something that you have to change. Number 6 is really telling yourself that you can do it all. Unless I'm wrong, and I've been doing this for a while, I've been working with so many different podcasters, there's only so much you can grow. There's this expression that goes, what got you here won't get you there. And it's so true. At some point, you're just going to burn out yourself from trying to do all the things to a high quality level. So if you are a small business owner, you have a business to run, and editing your podcast at some point will not make sense. So trying to market your podcast as the best possible product just by yourself, it's not going to cut it. So it's important to start assessing what will make sense. And even if that's something like getting a coach to help you gain confidence and reduce your overwhelm, whether that is finally investing in a course that's going to help you reduce your overwhelm, whether that's just delegating the editing to someone else, just figuring out which parts are not bringing you joy and what is getting you overwhelmed when it's time to market the podcast is really important for 2024. Now we're moving into number 7, which is social media territory, marketing your podcast on social media platforms. And I am recording this episode after having done a live podcasters roundtable with Riverside. And this question came up. Can social media still be effective to create audience growth? Well, absolutely, right? So I want to make sure that what we're leaving behind in 2023 is the post and ghost method, which is where you just try to be everywhere, right? And you're posting on all social media and you're not really paying attention to what you're doing. And what that means is you're just trying to just get your content out there, thinking like, okay, I just need to create seven types of posts, schedule all of them, and I don't need to worry. In case you haven't looked at your analytics, I'm just going to be guessing them for you. The posting and ghosting method does not work. So I want to make sure that you're looking at least at 2 platforms and just sticking to that and just creating optimized content for that. And what I mean by optimized is that, if you are on Instagram, you're not posting an image that is on landscape mode, right? Because people want to see vertical content. And if you're using video teasers. You're making the use of captions. Because let's be honest, even though algorithms change, the reality is if the content isn't good or if the content isn't easy to read, we're not going to be engaging with it, right? And so instead of creating 7 types of posts, I want you to create maybe 3 or 2 really good ones. And they are really optimized for the platform that you're using and using the additional time to engage with people one-on-one. I know so many of you, and you probably told me this, and I really wish my audience would engage more on social media. And the reality is, sometimes you have to go first because people feel like you're quote unquote a celebrity and they feel a little like, I don't know, a little uncomfortable just saying hi because they're like, they're going to ignore me, right? So making sure that you're not just posting and ignoring the accounts or ignoring the social media posts that people tag you on, that's not going to work in 2024, right? Podcast audiences have absolutely matured in terms of their consumption of podcasts and also how they see podcasts. And so moving into the number 8, which is the types of posts that you shouldn't be using to market your podcast in 2024, is definitely the audiograms. The static audiograms with just, new episode is out and then like the audio wave just moving. That is not going to work. It doesn't say anything. I'm not excited to see it. You're probably not excited to publish it. So let's create content that we're more excited about. Another type of post that doesn't perform at all and it should be scraping it for your podcast marketing is the static images. New episode is out with your face, the guest's face. That's it. Like that doesn't get me to do anything. Audience engagement comes from 3 factors. You're either entertaining me, you're educating me, or you're inspiring me. And if you're not doing any of these 3, if you're just using your posts as just reminders, it's going to be really hard to get people to get excited about that piece of content. So make sure that you're improving your marketing in 2024. And one great place to start is actually looking at episode 40, the common social media pitfalls that you need to avoid in order to see audience growth. So just make sure that you're listening to that. I'll also ensure that I'm including that in the show notes. So another thing that I think is not performing on social media very well is using exclusively branding photos. So photos that are very quote unquote corporate, and people want to see the behind the scenes. People want to see what's happening on the episode before, like the idea behind the episode. Static images don't really share the story. While they look beautiful on the feeds, that is corporate communication from 2017 that is not performing at all, because communication today is a lot more human, a lot more personal. And if you are a small business owner, as a podcaster, you have so much to talk about. I often share how episode ideas came from conversations with listeners. I follow up with listeners to say, hey, I actually covered your question on this week's episode. I will make sure that if I am having a conversation with someone, I take a photo and I share it on Instagram. It looks less polished. It looks more personal. And again, podcasts are not radio. Podcasts are not television. Podcasts are supposed to be a more intimate medium. And so it's okay to be imperfect. You can still be professional, but when you're sharing images of you doing things, when it goes beyond the perfected, rehearsed kind of thing, people really connect with you on a deeper level. And again, while I'm not saying that you shouldn't have branding photos, those are important. They shouldn't be filling your feed, right? So make sure that if you are going into a studio, you're taking a bunch of photos that look really fun, that look very, in the moment, quote unquote, feel like, oh, I want to give you this moment to your listeners, right? I want you to see what it was like when this happened. And so just whenever you're doing things, take photos of everything. And then you can use it even in that moment or a few months later. You can do it like look in the past. And still on the type of posts that I don't think are going to really connect a lot are the very complicated, the really difficult clips. Instead of trying to fit a video that is 3 minutes long and try to cut it down in multiple sections that are actually cohesive, instead of trying to spend 1 hour trimming, quote unquote, the perfect video. Embrace more imperfection, really. Create like 3, right? So stop dedicating so much time in perfecting one asset. So it's not necessarily like just sharing whatever, but it's also making sure that we're not on analysis paralysis on just sharing the one video, and that one video has to be quote unquote perfect. And the last one is to stop creating single use resources. So what I mean by this is that in your marketing, and this is kind of encompassing in every single facet of what I talked about. So really look at repurposing stuff more frequently. So what I mean is in your marketing, you should be promoting the same episode you released multiple times. You should be looking at creating multiple assets from the same episode instead of just creating one episode and one promo. It's making sure that you're creating a newsletter, right? But again, you can go ahead and say, hey, twice a year, I'm going to be creating the best of, where I'm going to be doing replays, or I'm going to just be able to create more content, more marketing content with the pieces of content that I've created once. And whether that is just purely repurposing and using an old social media post, which I've done and it still performed really well, is to also remember that when we are doing that, our audience is constantly growing. Our podcast audiences, change every almost like 6 months. For most people, sometimes it's like even 3 months. There's a lot of new people coming through to your podcast. So not helping them see old episodes that we've created is almost like a disservice to the one piece of content that you've created. I've worked with podcasters on creating whole seasons for like a whole summer, and it doesn't always need to be like straight up like replays. You can look at marketing that podcast through a different angle. So maybe it's just a segment of that episode. Maybe it's a 20-minute segment of a 40-minute or 1-hour interview. That was really, really interesting, right? So I want you to make sure that if you're looking at your content and you're feeling really overwhelmed because maybe your podcast only relies on guests, so maybe is breaking the content in multiple parts and marketing that episode multiple times. Maybe it's making sure that you're combining that with solo episodes. So as you're looking into the content strategy for 2024, really revisit your analytics and see what has resonated with people, what had better performance, better downloads, emails that people replied more to, or people that message you about that one episode that really resonated with them. Maybe what was the thing that that in your marketing resonated with transforming listeners into customers and doing more of those. So I hope this was an episode that helped you navigate what 2024 could mean without having to necessarily look at the quote unquote trends. You already have a ton of access to information, data that your audience is telling you, either through hard data or through testimonials and messages that your audience is giving you. So you can do this. All right. I hope this was a helpful episode. I would love to hear your ahas. Talk to me on Instagram. I'm at The Podcast Space. And I know there's just a lot going on in the season. If you're listening to this, maybe 2 months after December, a month after December, hey, 2 years after this, I would still love to hear from you if you are just listening to this episode, because that's the whole reason why I create evergreen content, because you create it once and then people will listen to it. All right, if you ever need help in your content strategy, in coaching and becoming a better podcaster, in reducing overwhelm, I am here for you, so reach out to me. You can always do that on Instagram, but also all the information that I mentioned here and how to work with me will be at thepodcastspace.com/podcast. This is, I believe, episode 50. I'm so excited to share with you some things that I know will, for a fact, transform how you're creating content in 2024. So just keep creating content that's imperfect but moves you forward. Bye.